My legs gave out first. I caught myself against the cold metal wall before my body hit the floor, and I stayed there, breathing hard, while the smell of hot food drifted past me from the counter, 20 steps away. 20 steps. I could not make them. None of us could. There were 7 of us that day, pressed into the corner of the feeding hall on Junction Station Kalis 9, watching line after line of other beings get called forward, fed, and sent on their way. My name is Vess. I am Tharnal, and on that station, on every station I had ever lived on, my kind did not exist on any list that mattered. The counter called out designations one after another. Drenok, Ashik, Colver. Names and codes flashed on the screen above the serving line, and each time, a crowd of some other species surged forward, collected their rations, and moved off to eat at long tables under bright lights. We watched from the wall. We always watched from the wall. The automated system had never once, in 400 cycles that I had counted, and many more before that which I had stopped counting, called the word Tharnal. That day was worse than most. Supply had been cut across the station because of a shipment delay, and even the small scraps we sometimes found in the waste bins near the kitchen had dried up. My podmate Rel had not eaten in 3 days. I could see it in the way her hands shook when she tried to steady herself against the wall. Another of us, a young one named Cass, had stopped speaking entirely, saving whatever strength she had left just to breathe. I want you to understand something before I go further. We did not think we were being cruel to ourselves by staying quiet. We had been taught, generation after generation, that drawing attention only made things worse. Complain, and you get moved to a worse station. Ask, and you get marked as difficult. So we stayed against the wall, and we stayed hungry, and we told ourselves that this was simply how the universe was built. I do not know exactly when she started looking at us. I only remember the moment I noticed her looking back. She was human, tall for her kind, with short brown hair pulled back, and a station uniform that still had the stiff, unworn look of someone new to the assignment. She carried a tray of food toward an empty table, the way I had seen hundreds of humans do before her, not slowing, not stopping, moving through the hall like water finds the fastest path downhill. Except she did stop. She stopped walking entirely, right in the middle of the floor, and turned around to look at us. I lowered my eyes the way I had been trained to do since I was small. Eye contact with other species without invitation was considered forward among my people, almost rude. But when I looked up again a moment later, she was still there, tray balanced in one hand, studying us with an expression I did not have a name for. She walked toward us. My first instinct was to shrink further into the wall. Rel made a small sound beside me, the kind we make when we expect to be told to move along, to stop loitering, to find somewhere else to be invisible. I braced for it. Instead, the human crouched down so she was closer to our eye level and said, "You were here yesterday. Same spot. And the day before that, too." None of us answered. It was not defiance. We simply did not have a response ready. Nobody had spoken directly to us in longer than I could remember. Not as people. Not with a question that expected a real answer. "Have you eaten today?" she asked. I do not know why it was me who spoke. Maybe because I was the closest to her. My voice came out rougher than I wanted it to. "We are not on the schedule," I said. It was the truest sentence I owned. She frowned, and for a moment, I thought I had said something wrong. Then she said, "That is not an answer to my question," and stood up. She walked to the ration terminal at the edge of the hall, the one that controlled the automated counter, and began tapping through screens. I watched her face change as she scrolled, confusion sliding into something sharper. I did not need to see the screen to know what she had found, because I already knew what was there. Nothing. Not a denial. Not a low-priority marking. Simply nothing. As if Tharnal were not a category of being that could be hungry at all. She came back with her own tray and set it down in front of me without a word. Then she turned around, walked back to the counter, and returned a minute later with another tray, which she placed in front of Rel. She did this 5 more times, back and forth, until all 7 of us had food sitting in front of us for the first time, in longer than I could measure. I remember staring at the tray for a long moment before I could make myself reach for it. Some old fear told me this was a mistake, that someone would come and take it away, that we would be punished for accepting something we were never meant to have. But Rel was already eating, tears running silently down her face while she chewed, and Cass had picked up a piece of bread with both trembling hands, and I understood that whatever came next, this moment was already real, and could not be undone. The human did not sit with us. She did not make a speech. She simply picked up her own tray, found a spot at the end of a nearby table, and ate her meal like it was an ordinary day. I learned her name later, Grace Miller. A logistics technician, only 3 days into her posting on the station, still learning where the supply corridors led, and which doors stuck when you pushed them. The next day we returned to our usual spot out of habit, expecting the moment to have been a strange exception, a kindness that would not repeat itself. Grace found us again anyway. She brought food again, this time before we had even settled against the wall, as if she had been looking for us the moment her shift allowed it. By the third day, someone had noticed. A Colvert administrator named Petrick cornered her near the serving counter while I sat close enough to hear, pretending, out of old habit, that I was not listening at all. "This is not sustainable," Petrick said, his voice carrying the particular flatness of someone quoting a manual from memory. "You are pulling rations from allocated crew supply. There is a proper channel for adding a species classification to the distribution list, a review committee, documentation. It typically takes 8 to 11 months to process." "They are hungry now," Grace said. "That is not the point I am making. It is the only point that matters to me," she said, and picked up another tray. Petrick did not argue further that day, but I could tell from the stiffness in his posture that this would not be the end of it. Systems like the one that governed Junction Station Kalis 9 did not bend easily, and people who tried to bend them on their own, without permission, without the proper stamps and signatures, tended to be reminded quickly of their place. Sure enough, less than a week later, Grace was called to a formal review before the station oversight panel. I could not attend, of course. Beings like me were not permitted in those halls. But I heard about it afterward from another human who had been present, a maintenance worker named Daniel, who told me the story while handing me a ration bar he said was extra, though I suspected it was not. According to Daniel, the panel had asked Grace to explain her unauthorized redistribution of station resources. They asked her to cite the regulation under which she believed she was permitted to feed an unlisted species using crew supply. They reminded her that the compact's priority index existed for a reason, that structure prevented chaos, that if every worker began making individual decisions about who deserved food, the entire station's supply chain would collapse into disorder. Grace listened to all of it. Then, according to Daniel, she said something simple. She said that she understood the index existed to keep things running smoothly, and she was not trying to destroy anyone's system. But she had seen 7 people sitting against a wall every single day, watching everyone else eat, and she could not make herself walk past that a second time, knowing she had food in her own hand. She said the index might be very old and very important, but it had made a mistake that had lasted for who knew how many cycles, and she was not willing to wait 8 to 11 months for a committee to notice what she had noticed in 3 days. The panel did not reverse the index that day. Structures that old do not move quickly, no matter how clearly their mistakes are pointed out. But they also did not stop her, perhaps because station morale mattered to them more than a handful of extra ration packets. Perhaps because enough other humans on the crew had started asking questions of their own once they heard what Grace was doing. Word spread strangely on a station like Kalis 9. It does not move through official channels. It moves through mess halls and supply corridors, and the quiet conversations people have while waiting for a lift. Within 2 weeks, 3 more humans had started setting aside small portions of their own rations for us. A woman named Ellen, who worked in the medical bay, began leaving supplies near our corner during her rounds, never making a show of it, never waiting to be thanked. A young man named Peter, barely out of training, started bringing extra bread every evening and would sit with us for a few minutes before his next shift, asking simple questions about our lives, listening to the answers as though they mattered. I want to be honest and tell you that not everything changed easily or quickly. There were still days when supply ran short and there was not enough to go around, and on those days, the old instinct to disappear quietly into the wall came rushing back into all of us. There were still administrators who muttered about protocol violations, and one instance where an automated inventory flag nearly got Grace suspended from her duties for what the system labeled irregular resource distribution. She had to explain herself twice more that month, each time calmly, each time refusing to back down, each time simply repeating that she could not unsee what she had seen. But something had shifted that could not be pushed back into its old shape. For the first time since I could remember, someone had looked at us, truly looked, and decided that what they saw mattered enough to act on immediately, without waiting for permission from a system that had never once thought to ask if we were hungry. The turning point, the moment I think of now when I try to explain to younger Tharnil what changed, came almost a month after that first tray of food. Grace found us at our usual spot, as she always did, but this time, she did not set the trays down on the floor beside us. Instead, she gestured toward an empty table near the far wall. "Come sit," she said. I remember the strange, disorienting fear that rose in me at those two simple words. Sitting at a table meant being visible in a different way than sitting against a wall. It meant existing in the same space as everyone else, subject to the same glances, the same judgments, the same possibility of being told we did not belong there. For a long moment, none of us moved. Grace did not push. She simply stood there, holding the door of possibility open, waiting. It was Cass, the youngest among us, who moved first. She had regained some of her strength over the past weeks, enough that her legs no longer shook when she stood. She crossed the open floor toward the table, each step slow and careful, as though the ground itself might refuse to hold her weight. When she reached the table and sat down, nothing happened. No alarm sounded. No administrator rushed forward to correct the mistake. She simply sat, and the station kept turning around her, exactly as it had before. One by one, the rest of us followed. I was the last, my legs feeling heavier than they had any reason to feel for such a short distance. When I finally lowered myself into the seat across from Grace, she smiled. Not the wide, performative smile some humans use when they want something from you, but something smaller and steadier, the kind of smile that did not seem to require anything from me at all. "There," she said. "Was that so hard?" I did not have an answer that would have made sense in her language, so I said nothing, and she did not seem to mind. Over the following months, the number of us who ate at that table grew. Other Tharnil from other parts of the station, hearing that something had changed, began making their way to the feeding hall at the same hour, uncertain, watchful, ready to retreat at the first sign that the kindness had been a mistake or an illusion. Each time, Grace or one of the others who had joined her would notice the newcomers and quietly make room. The compact's priority index was never officially rewritten, not in all the time I remained on that station. The old machine of rules and classifications continued to grind forward exactly as it always had, indifferent to the small rebellion happening in its own feeding hall. But machines, I have come to understand, are not the only thing that decides how people are treated. Somewhere underneath all the forms and committees and 8 to 11-month review cycles, there are simply people, deciding moment by moment whether to notice each other or look away. I think about that difference often now. It would have been easy for Grace to walk past us that first day, the way countless others had walked past us for cycle after cycle. Nothing in her training required her to stop. Nothing in her job description mentioned us at all. She had every reason available to keep walking, and every excuse ready if anyone had ever asked her why she didn't. She stopped anyway. I have read since then that this is not an unusual thing among her kind. Humans, it seems, have a habit of noticing the overlooked and acting before anyone grants them permission to. I cannot say whether this is common across their entire species, since I have known only a handful of them personally, but I know what I witnessed with my own eyes on Junction Station Kalis 9. I watched one woman with a tray of food refuse to accept that an old system's blindness had to remain everyone else's problem forever. I watched her keep coming back, day after day, until her small act of defiance became an ordinary habit, and then became something other humans began doing too, quietly, without ceremony, simply because they had finally been shown where to look. We still do not appear on the Compact's official list. Perhaps we never will, but we sit at a table now instead of against a wall, and there are hands that reach for us when the trays come around instead of eyes that slide past us like we are part of the furniture. It is a small change if you write it down in words like these. It did not feel small to live through. Some nights, when the feeding hall has emptied out, and only a few of us remain finishing our meals slowly, because we still cannot quite believe there will be more tomorrow, I think about all the cycles before Grace arrived. I think about the hundreds of other beings who must have walked past us during those years, busy with their own lives, their own hunger, their own reasons for not stopping. I do not blame them, not really. It is easy to walk past what you have never been taught to see. But I will always remember the one who did stop, the one who looked twice instead of once, the one who decided that 7 strangers sitting quietly against a wall deserved more than a glance that slid away and forgot them by the next corridor. Her name was Grace, and she taught me something I had never learned in 400 cycles of counting how long we could go without being noticed. She taught me that sometimes the largest change in a person's life does not arrive with sirens or speeches, or committees finally agreeing to rewrite an old rule. Sometimes it arrives quietly, carried on a single tray of food, held out by someone who simply refused to look away. I do not know what will happen to the Compact's index in the years ahead, whether it will ever be rewritten to include names like mine. But I know that on one station, in one feeding hall, for 7 people who had almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen, one human decided that was not going to remain true for one single day longer than it had to. That was enough to change everything that came after.